I can't take it anymore. He's a burden, a sickness that consumes me." The silent scream of despair echoed only in the widow's mind as her icy fingers released the small, feverish body onto the damp forest earth. Her son's weak cry mingled with the rustling of leaves beneath her hurried feet, each step a nail in her own coffin of guilt. She ran, without looking back, the darkness of the night swallowing her act of cruelty. But what she didn't know was that a pair of wild, ancient eyes watched everything from the shadows, and what that bear would do next would change the child's destiny forever. The darkness of the night, which for the widow was a cloak of escape, was for the brown bear a familiar veil where every scent and sound told a story. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom, fixed on the small abandoned form, a fragile point of life amidst the wild immensity, he approached with the caution of one who did not wish to frighten, his steps heavy, yet surprisingly soft, barely breaking the forest's silence. The boy, huddled and trembling on the cold earth, let out muffled whimpers, a sound that, for the bear, was not of prey but of helplessness. It was the same sound he had heard from his own cubs in other times, when they were lost or cold. The large animal lowered his head, sniffing the air, sensing the smell of sickness and fear, but also that of pure, unprotected innocence. He gently nudged his snout against the boy's feverish cheek, who shivered but did not open his eyes. The bear's thick fur, warm and soft, offered a welcome contrast to the icy night air. With a slow and careful movement, the bear passed one of his enormous paws under the boy's tiny body, lifting him with a delicacy that belied his brute strength. The small body, light as a feather, nestled against the animal's furry chest, finding a warmth that his human mother had denied him. Meanwhile, the widow ran, her heart pounding erratically in her chest, each dry leaf under her feet cracking like a whip against her conscience. She couldn't shake the image of her son's pale face, his lips parched, his eyes half closed by fever. A cold, sharp pang of regret tried to pierce the armor of despair she had built. "No, I can't go back," she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse from crying and fear. Guilt was a hungry monster pursuing her, but the relief of no longer carrying the burden of the sick boy in her arms was a sweet poison that propelled her forward away. She clung to this false freedom, trying to convince herself that she had done the only thing possible, the only thing that would save her from sinking deeper into misery. But the truth was that she was sinking, and the darkness of the forest, which she thought she had left behind, now inhabited her own heart. Far from there, the bear walked with the boy, who now slept a more peaceful sleep, warmed by the robust body of his new guardian. The maternal instinct, so absent in the widow, unexpectedly blossomed in the beast. He carried him to the safety of his den, a natural refuge carved among ancient roots and mossy rocks, where the cold breeze could not reach and the earthy smell was comforting. The bear knew that the night was long and dangerous, but with the boy nestled in his arms, he felt a responsibility that went beyond his own survival. He was a link in an invisible chain, an improbable guardian who would rewrite the child's destiny forever, far from human malice and abandonment, in a sanctuary of fur and warmth, where life, despite everything, would find a new and surprising beginning. The abandoned son, unknowingly, was being embraced by the very essence of nature, which, in its ancestral wisdom, had chosen to protect him. The bear, with the boy nestled in his robust arms, entered the den. It was a natural refuge, carved among ancient roots and mossy rocks, where the cold breeze could not reach, and the earthy smell of the forest was comforting. The floor, lined with a thick layer of dry leaves and soft moss, formed an improvised, yet surprisingly cozy bed. With a delicacy that belied his brute strength, the large animal gently placed the small body in the center of the bed. observing him with a tender curiosity and palpable concern in his deep eyes. The boy still trembled slightly, but the warmth of the den and the bear's proximity began to take effect, warming his icy limbs and calming his small heart. The bear sat, shielding the boy with his own body, as a mother bear would with her most vulnerable cub. He lowered his head and gently licked the boy's feverish forehead, an instinctive gesture that for the child was a cool, damp relief against his hot, reddened skin. His eyes, once wild, now reflected an almost human sweetness and concern, a spark of compassion that transcended the barrier between species. He knew the fever was dangerous, and though he couldn't cure it, he could offer his best. Constant warmth, unwavering security, and a protective presence. Slowly, the boy's muffled whimpers ceased, replaced by a more regular and deep breath. Heavy sleep embraced him, a sleep of exhaustion, and for the first time in a long time, of unexpected and profound peace. The bear remained motionless, a silent guardian, feeling the small heart beat against his own furry chest, a fragile yet resilient melody that echoed in the quiet of the den, promising a new dawn. Meanwhile, the widow finally reached her small cabin, her legs heavy and her soul even more so. Each step towards the door was a battle against the gravity of her own guilt, which dragged her into the abyss. The door creaked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening, a cruel echo of the absence that filled every corner of the house. There was no longer the weak cry, nor the persistent cough, nor the difficult breathing of her son. The house, once filled with the boy's sickly presence, was now an icy void, a mirror of her own hardened and desolate heart. She threw herself into the nearest chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders convulsing in dry, tearless sobs that seemed to tear at her throat in a silent scream of despair. The image of her abandoned son in the forest replayed in her mind, a personal horror film she couldn't turn off. She tried to justify herself, whispering into the void, "He was suffering. I was suffering. There was no more hope for either of us, only misery and pain." But the words sounded hollow, lies that couldn't stifle the shrill cry of guilt that now relentlessly pursued her, an invisible monster. Solitude, once a bitter companion, had now transformed into a relentless executioner, squeezing her chest with invisible claws. She looked at the empty crib in the corner of the room, an object that was now just a cruel reminder of her irremediable failure, of her denied motherhood. Her fingers trembled as she touched the cold fabric of the sheet covering the small mattress. There was no child's scent, only the pungent smell of abandonment, of despair and late regret that suffocated her. A sharp, cutting pain pierced her chest, not the pain of loss, but the excruciating pain of cruelty, of the irreversible choice she had made. She closed her eyes tightly, wishing the darkness would swallow her whole, that sleep would take her away from that incessant torture. But sleep did not come. Only the relentless vigil of conscience, which promised nights and days of endless torment. Remorse was a slow fire, burning her from within, while the forest far away guarded its secret and nurtured a new life with affection and protection. The widow remained huddled in the chair, her body rigid with tension and the cold that seemed to emanate from within her. Dawn dragged on, and each tick-tock of the clock on the wall was a hammer pounding in her head, reminding her of the passing time and the irreversibility of her act. Her eyes, red and swollen, fixed on empty spots in the cabin, but her mind was trapped in the image of her son, small and defenseless, left at the mercy of the night. A wave of nausea hit her, not from hunger, but from self-loathing. She tried to stand, stumbling, reaching for a glass of water, but her legs gave way and she fell back into the chair, her breath catching. The smell of damp earth and dry leaves, which she imagined she had left behind in the forest, seemed to permeate the cabin, a constant reminder of the place where she had committed her gravest failure. "I am a monster," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible, torn by anguish. The weight of solitude was overwhelming, but now it came with an even greater burden, the certainty that she had traded the pain of her son's illness for the excruciating pain of her own conscience. Her fingers gripped the arms of the chair so tightly that her nails dug into the wood, seeking a physical pain that could, for an instant, silence the mental torment. Far from there, in the dark and cozy den, the boy, whom the bear affectionately called Little Son in his instinct, began to show signs of improvement. The fever, though still present, seemed to diminish. His body, once so hot, now radiated a softer warmth, and his breathing became less noisy. The bear, a vigilant guardian, observed every change, every small movement. He had briefly gone out to find some wild berries and soft roots he knew, bringing them back for the boy. With his snout, he gently nudged a handful of ripe blackberries near the boy's lips. Slowly, the boy's eyes opened, revealing a deep blue, though still a little clouded by weakness. He blinked, confused, trying to focus on the enormous furry figure in front of him. There was no fear in his gaze, only a childlike curiosity and an instinctive acceptance of that warmth and protection. The bear let out a soft grunt, almost a purr, and licked the boy's small hand, which, to the animal's surprise, did not retract. Instead, the boy extended a weak finger and touched the soft fur of the bear's snout, a gesture of pure and innocent trust. A silent and profound connection was established between them, transcending language and species. The bear felt a different warmth in his chest, a warmth that was not just from the boy's body, but from a purpose, from a responsibility he had embraced with all the strength of his being. He knew the path would be long, that the boy would need more than just warmth and fruits. But at that moment, in that safe refuge, the little son's life was being rewritten, far from the shadows of human malice, and embraced by the light of a wild and unconditional compassion. The bear lay down again, allowing the boy to nestle against his flank, and both fell asleep, side by side, under the silent protection of the forest. The air of the den was imbued with a new hope, a testament that kindness could emerge in the most unexpected places, transforming misfortune into a miracle. The air of the den was imbued with a new hope, a testament that kindness could emerge in the most unexpected places, transforming misfortune into a miracle. At dawn, the first rays of sun filtered through the rock crevices, painting the interior with a soft glow. The bear, who had watched over him all night, felt the small body nestled against his flank stir. The little son opened his eyes again, and this time the blue was clearer, the fever visibly diminished. A light sigh escaped the boy's lips, and he tried to stretch, a weak yet full of life movement. The bear grunted softly, a sound that, for the boy, was not threatening, but comforting, like a lullaby. With the delicacy of a father, the bear nudged his snout against the boy's face, who responded with a faint smile, the first in many days. The animal had gone out again during the early morning, and now brought a small honeycomb and some fresh berries to the den, carefully placing them near the boy. The boy, his eyes wide with curiosity, extended his small hand and picked one of the berries, bringing it to his mouth with visible effort. The sweet taste and soft texture were a balm for his parched throat. The bear watched every movement, feeling a deep satisfaction, a warmth that spread through his furry chest. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the widow awoke to an oppressive silence. The morning light, which should have brought relief, only highlighted the emptiness. The crib in the corner of the room seemed to scream the absence of her son. She dragged herself out of bed, her body heavy, her mind clouded by insomnia and remorse. Every object in the house, A small wooden spoon, a piece of cloth she used to wipe the boy's face, became a torment, a cruel reminder of her choice. She tried to sweep the floor, wash the dishes, anything to fill the void and silence the echoes of guilt, but her hands trembled and her concentration waned. The image of her son, feverish and abandoned, was a constant shadow in her vision. She found herself standing at the cabin door, looking at the dense forest, feeling a shiver that didn't come from the wind, but from the dread that assailed her. The forest, once a refuge of peace, was now a labyrinth of guilt in her mind, a place from which there was no return. Tears, which seemed to have dried, began to flow again, hot and bitter, streaming down her pale, marked face. She huddled on the floor, hugging her knees, desperately wishing she could go back in time, undo the act. But she knew it was too late. Despair was a bottomless pit, and she was sinking deeper and deeper. In the den, the little son was visibly better. The fever had completely subsided, and he could now sit up, leaning against the bear's warm body. His eyes explored the surroundings, fixing on the textures of the rocks and the dry leaves that lined the floor. The bear, with a soft grunt, pushed the honey closer to the boy, who, with a smile, dipped his finger into the sweet nectar and brought it to his mouth. It was a gesture of trust and acceptance that melted the bear's wild heart. The connection between them deepened with each passing moment, a language of touch, warmth, and instinct. The boy, who had never known a mother's affection, found in the furry arms of the beast a pure and unconditional love, a refuge that humanity had denied him. The bear, noticing the boy's improvement, began to take him out of the den for short periods so he could feel the sun on his face and the fresh scent of the forest. The boy, though still weak, clung to the bear's fur, his blue eyes shining with new curiosity and wonder for the world around him. He laughed softly when the bear gently swayed him, a sound that echoed in the forest like a melody of hope. Nature, in its ancestral wisdom, was healing not only his body, but also his soul, filling the void left by abandonment. The widow, on the other hand, lived in a private purgatory. The solitude of the cabin was a mirror of her empty soul, and remorse, a parasite that consumed her from within. She couldn't eat or sleep, and her face, once hardened by pain, was now marked by deep anguish and excruciating guilt. The forest, for her, was a monument to her cruelty, while for the little son, it was a sanctuary of life and love, where the miracle of human connection, or rather, the connection between species, blossomed surprisingly, rewriting his destiny far from human malice and oblivion. Maria, the widow, dragged herself through the cabin like a shadow. Her eyes, once filled with a cold hardness, now carried the weight of sleepless nights and days of torment. The foggy mirror in the corner of the room revealed a pale, emaciated face, with deep, dark circles that betrayed the internal battle she was fighting. She tried to eat, but the stale bread felt like sand in her mouth, and the cold tea went down with difficulty, as if her throat refused to accept any sustenance. With each sip, the image of her son, feverish and hungry, arose in her mind, a relentless ghost that prevented her from finding peace. Guilt was no longer a whisper, but a deafening scream that echoed in the empty walls of the house, making every moment a torture. She could no longer stay within the four walls. The air seemed to suffocate her, and the silence was filled with the echoes of a cry that only she heard. With trembling hands, she opened the door and stepped out into the fresh morning air, which, for her, seemed laden with condemnation. Her steps led her, almost without her realizing it, towards the edge of the forest, the place she cursed and feared. There was no intention to search, only a desperate need to escape her own private hell, even if it meant approaching the scene of her crime. She looked at the imposing trees, their trunks like accusing fingers, and felt a chill down her spine that was not from the wind, but from the dread of her own conscience. Far from there, in the heart of the forest, the little son grew stronger every day. His blue eyes shone with a vivacity that once seemed impossible. The bear, his loyal guardian, had found a sunny clearing where the boy could play with twigs and leaves. Under the attentive and affectionate gaze of the beast, the boy laughed, a sweet and crystalline sound that filled the forest air, a vibrant contrast to the heavy silence of the widow's cabin. The bear watched him with a tenderness that transcended wild nature, gently nudging him with his snout when he lost his balance, or bringing him new discoveries, a colorful feather, a smooth stone. The little son had learned to fully trust his protector. He nestled into the bear's soft fur to sleep, feeling the constant rhythm of his breathing, a sound that was the most beautiful lullaby. The forest, which for the widow was a symbol of her cruelty, for the boy was a home, a cradle of life and learning. He learned the sounds of the birds, the scent of wild flowers, the feel of the earth beneath his bare feet. There was no fear, only an innate curiosity and a simple joy that radiated from his small being, nurtured by the unconditional love of his guardian. Maria, the widow, walked aimlessly along the forest's edge, her thoughts a whirlwind of regret and despair. She stopped, leaning against a sturdy oak, feeling the roughness of the bark against her feverish forehead. For an instant, a distant sound, almost imperceptible, reached her ears. A child's laughter. Her heart leaped, a mixture of hope and dread. Was her mind playing tricks on her? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the illusion. "It can't be," she whispered, her lips dry. "He's gone." But the sound, for a brief moment, had been so real, so full of life. It was a cruel echo of a happiness she had destroyed. The bear, realizing the boy was more active, began to teach him about the forest. He showed him which berries were safe to eat, where to find fresh water, and how to recognize different scents. The little son followed him with steady steps, his eyes absorbing every detail, every lesson from nature. He didn't miss walls, toys made by human hands, or the comfort of a bed. His world was vast and green, and his father, his friend, his protector, was the most majestic creature he had ever known. The forest, with its ancestral wisdom, was shaping a future for the boy, a future of resilience and love, far from the shadow of the malice that had abandoned him, a true miracle of wildlife. Blossoming with each new day, Maria, still leaning against the oak, felt the child's laughter echo again, this time clearer, closer, like a forbidden melody invading her private purgatory. It was not an illusion, nor the voice of guilt in her mind. Her eyes widened, and an icy shiver ran down her spine, mingling with a pang of something that dared to be hope, a feeling she thought had died long ago. She pushed herself from the tree, her feet moving on their own, propelled by a force she didn't understand, but which was stronger than the paralyzing fear that consumed her. Each dry leaf that cracked under her feet sounded like thunder in her ears, and her heart pounded erratically against her ribs, a frantic drum of anticipation and dread. She advanced cautiously, creeping through the dense bushes, branches scratching her skin unnoticed, her gaze fixed in the direction from which the sound came. The forest, once a place of terror and guilt, was now a veil that hid a mystery, a possibility that defied all her logic and her deepest despair. Meanwhile, a few meters away, the little son was in his own world of discoveries. He had found a twisted stick that, in his fertile imagination, looked like a small horse, and he swung it in the air with enthusiasm, laughing with the pure and unhindered joy of a child who, despite everything, was discovering the wonders of the world. The bear, lying a few meters away, with his imposing presence, watched him with an almost human expression of contentment. His deep eyes followed every movement of the boy, and a soft grunt escaped his throat from time to time, like a silent encouragement, a note of affection in the forest's symphony. The morning sun filtered through the treetops, painting the clearing with golden dancing patches, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and fresh earth. The boy, with his torn clothes and dirt-smudged face, was the image of happiness and freedom, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding at the edge of his sanctuary on the brink of revelation. Maria, her breath suspended, her body tense as a violin string, finally reached a thick holly bush whose pointed leaves seemed to want to stop her. Carefully, she pushed aside some branches, and what she saw made her catch a scream in her throat, a sound that refused to come out. There in the sunny clearing was him, her son. Not a ghost, not a painful memory that haunted her, but a living child, playing with a vitality she never imagined possible. His blue eyes, once clouded by fever, now shone with unmistakable, curious vivacity, and beside him, majestic and imposing, was the bear. The beast she had imagined as a merciless predator. The tragic end for her son was in fact his guardian, his protector. The bear gently nudged the boy with his snout, and the little son laughed, hugging the animal's furry neck with a trust that tore Maria's heart, ripping it into 1,000 pieces. The scene was surreal, a miracle unfolding before her eyes. The boy whom she had abandoned to certain death was not only alive but thriving, loved and protected by a wild creature. Guilt, already an unbearable burden, now transformed into a tsunami of shame and regret, an excruciating pain that consumed her from within. She felt her legs give way and had to hold onto the branches to keep from falling to her knees, from collapsing under the weight of the overwhelming truth. The tears, which before were of despair for her own misery, were now of an excruciating pain for the cruelty she had committed and the kindness she had scorned, a kindness that nature offered where she had failed. Maria's face contorted into a mask of shock and disbelief. Her lips trembled. The world she knew crumbled, revealing a truth that was both terrifying and wonderfully impossible. She had condemned her son, but nature, in its infinite wisdom and compassion, had saved him, and the bear, in its purest instinct, had loved and nurtured him. A muffled sob escaped her lips, and she recoiled, unable to tear her eyes from the sight that would change her life forever. The turning point had arrived, and with it the certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Her soul was exposed and the path back was uncertain, but the path forward even more so. Maria recoiled a few more steps, the holly branches scratching her clothes unnoticed. The sob she had stifled now turned into a hoarse moan, a mixture of relief and an even deeper pain. Her son was alive. Not just alive, but happy, playing, laughing in the arms of a creature she had feared. The image of the small body nestled in the bear's soft fur, the pure trust in the boy's blue eyes, all of it was an overwhelming blow to her already torn conscience. She turned, stumbling over her own feet, and ran, not away from the forest but into it, seeking refuge in the density of the trees, as if she could hide from the truth she had just uncovered. Maria's heart pounded erratically, a drum of guilt and shame. Each dry leaf under her feet seemed to scream her name. Each ray of sun that filtered through the treetops seemed to judge her. She threw herself onto the damp ground, hugging her knees, allowing the tears to flow freely, hot and bitter, washing not only her face, but the facade of hardness she had built. What had she done? She abandoned her own son, and nature, in its infinite wisdom, had taken him in. The bear, the wild beast, had shown more love and compassion than she, his own mother. This revelation was an unbearable burden, a cruel mirror that showed the true monstrosity of her actions. Far from there, in the sunny clearing, the little son continued his exploration. He had discovered a small stream that snaked among the rocks, and was now fascinated by the dance of the water. With a smile, he extended his small hand, feeling the cold, crystalline current flow through his fingers. The bear, lying on a sun-warmed rock, watched him with a protective serenity. He had taught the boy to drink the purest water, to recognize the fish that swam swiftly, and to respect the strength of the current. The boy, with his insatiable curiosity, pointed to a colorful butterfly landing on a wildflower, and the bear grunted softly, as if sharing the wonder of that moment. The connection between them was palpable, an invisible web of affection and trust that grew stronger each day. The boy didn't miss the human world. The forest was his home, and the bear his family. He had forgotten the pain of fever, the feeling of abandonment. His world now was made of scents of earth and pine, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the soft touch of the bear's fur. He felt safe, loved, belonging. Nature had filled the void left by human cruelty with an abundance of life and affection. Maria, still huddled on the forest floor, felt the cold of the earth penetrate her bones. But it was the cold in her soul that consumed her. The image of her son, happy with the bear, alternated with the memory of her own despair and the heinous act. A question tormented her. What would she do now? Could she approach? Did she have the right to try to reclaim the son she abandoned? Shame prevented her, the fear of rejection paralyzed her, and the certainty that the boy was better off without her was a final blow. Her fingers pressed into the damp earth, seeking an anchor, a meaning for the confusion that overwhelmed her. The forest, once a symbol of her guilt, was now also the setting for a miracle that confronted her with the magnitude of her failure and the depth of a love she couldn't give. She knew she needed to change, that she needed to find a path to redemption, not just for her son, but for herself, to appease the torment that consumed her day and night. But the first step was the hardest, an abyss of uncertainty and regret that she would have to cross alone, not knowing if light awaited her on the other side. Maria remained huddled on the damp forest floor, her body trembling, no longer from cold, but from the magnitude of the revelation that had struck her. The abyss of uncertainty awaiting her seemed insurmountable. Her eyes, swollen and red, stared into the void, but in her mind, the image of her son, alive and smiling in the bear's furry arms, repeated incessantly. Each laugh of the little son she had heard echoed in her soul like an accusation, a cruel reminder of her failure and the kindness she had denied. Shame was a poison, corroding her from within, and regret, an overwhelming weight that prevented her from breathing. She had abandoned her son to death, and the forest, which should have been his tomb, had become his cradle. The bear, the beast she feared, was the father she couldn't be, the guardian she hadn't dared to imagine. Slowly, Maria dragged herself to a more upright position, her muscles aching, her mind in turmoil. She couldn't leave. An invisible force bound her to that place, a desperate need to understand, to witness more of that miracle. Hidden among the dense foliage, she observed the clearing again. The little son now tried to imitate the birds, extending his small arms and flapping them in the air, a contagious smile lighting up his face. The bear, with infinite patience, lay beside him, watching him with eyes that overflowed with deep affection. The boy turned, and with a gesture of pure innocence, rested his head against the bear's flank, who responded with a soft grunt, almost a purr. It was a scene of unconditional love, of pure connection, that tore and healed Maria's heart at the same time. She felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest, a strange and almost forgotten feeling. Hope. Not the hope of reclaiming her son, for she knew she had no such right, but the hope that kindness existed, that love could blossom even in the most improbable circumstances. Nature had taught her a lesson that human life, in its cruelty, had not been able to. The tears returned, but this time they were not just of despair and guilt, but also of a deep sadness for the person she had become and of a nascent, still fragile determination to change. She needed to be worthy of that miracle, worthy of the chance for redemption, even if it meant accepting that her son had found a home and a love she couldn't give. At that instant, Maria understood that redemption would not be easy or quick, It was not about asking her son for forgiveness, but about forgiving herself, about rebuilding the woman she had been before pain consumed her. She knew she would have to step away for now, to allow the little son to continue to flourish in his wild sanctuary. But she would no longer do so with a heart hardened by abandonment, but with a soul marked by gratitude and humility. She stood up, her knees weak, but her mind clearer than it had been in a long time. Her eyes swept the clearing one last time, etching every detail of her son's happiness into her memory, like a precious treasure. The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, and the forest prepared for night. Maria took one last breath, a mixture of pain and a strange peace, and turned her back on the clearing. Her steps were slow and hesitant, but this time they were not steps of escape, but rather of a new beginning, of an internal journey in search of her own humanity. She didn't know what the future held for her, but she knew she couldn't continue to live in the shadow of the cruel woman she had been. The forest, which was once the stage of her crime, was now the thorny path to her redemption, a place where life, love, and hope had found a way to blossom, even amidst the darkness. The little son would continue to be cared for by nature, and Maria, in turn, began to be healed by the truth. Maria walked back to the cabin, her body tired, but her soul in a state of wakefulness she hadn't felt in years. Her steps, once dragged by despair, were now firm, though still laden with deep exhaustion. The image of the little son laughing in the bear's arms was etched in her mind, a vision that paradoxically was both a balm and an open wound. The relief of knowing he was alive was immense, but the shame of her own cruelty, the pain of seeing the happiness she couldn't give, was an even greater torment. She felt the weight of every wrong choice, of every moment of bitterness that had led her to that heinous act. Upon reaching the cabin, the silence that once suffocated her now seemed different. It was no longer a silence of emptiness, but a silence of deep reflection. She didn't light the lamp. The twilight of the approaching night seemed more suited to her state of mind. She sat at the rustic wooden table, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the darkness. The stale bread and cold tea were still there, untouched. But for the first time in a long time, the idea of food did not repulse her. It was not physical hunger, but a need to nurture something within herself that had been neglected for so long, her own humanity. She didn't know where to begin. The path to redemption seemed long and steep, and she was alone. But the vision of her son, so vibrant and full of life, was a small flame igniting in her hardened heart. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she could try to be a better person, worthy of the chance that life or nature had given her son. Maria took a deep breath, and for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of the air, but a strange lightness, a breath of possibility. She stood up, her muscles protesting, and went to the window. The forest, now dark and mysterious, no longer seemed like a monster to her, but a sanctuary of secrets and miracles. Far from there, under the star-studded canopy of the forest, the little son slept deeply, nestled against the bear's warm, furry flank. The night air carried the scent of damp earth and dry leaves, and the sounds of the forest, the distant croak of a frog, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, were the perfect lullaby. The boy breathed with the regularity of a peaceful sleep, his lips curved in a slight smile, as if he were dreaming of the day's adventures, of the freedom that nature offered him. The bear, vigilant, kept one eye open, his senses sharpened for any unusual movement or sound. His massive body was a wall of protection for the small being he had welcomed with such affection. During the day, the little son had explored a new corner of the clearing, discovering a small rabbit burrow and watching an agile squirrel hide its nuts. The bear had guided him with patience, showing him how to move silently through the vegetation, how to identify animal tracks, and how to respect the rhythm of nature. Each day, the boy grew stronger, more curious, more connected to his environment. His movements were more agile, his eyes more observant. He had learned to communicate with the bear through simple gestures, touches, and guttural sounds that only they understood, a unique and profound language. The forest was his school, his playground, his home. He missed nothing, for everything he needed. Love, security, learning, and the wonder of life was there, in the arms of nature and in the company of his improbable guardian. The little son was the personification of resilience, a living testament that love can arise from the ashes of abandonment and that kindness at times resides in the most unexpected hearts. The moonlight filtered through the treetops, painting the clearing with a silvery glow, and the boy, in his deep sleep, was the image of peace and innocence, a silent miracle that continued to blossom. Maria, in the dark cabin, felt a solitary tear roll down her face. It was not a tear of self-pity, but of a painful yet liberating understanding. She had sought peace in flight, but true peace lay in facing the truth, in accepting responsibility, and in finding a new way to live. She knew that the first step would be small, perhaps just eating something or cleaning the cabin, but it would be a step. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that there was a tomorrow that she would need to build, brick by brick, with humility and a new purpose. The journey would be long, but she was ready to begin. Maria, with a clearer mind, began her journey of redemption with a simple yet significant act. She lit the lamp. The flickering flame illuminated the dusty cabin, revealing the chaos she had allowed to settle, a reflection of her own soul. With a deep sigh, she picked up a forgotten broom in the corner and began to sweep the floor. Each movement was an effort to clean not only the dirt, but also the cobwebs of her past. The dust that rose in the air seemed to carry with it the grievances and regrets, and Maria felt a strange catharsis in that manual labor. She washed the few dishes, scrubbed the wooden table, and made the bed. Gestures that once seemed futile now were filled with a new purpose. By organizing her external environment, she began to organize her internal world. The physical tiredness was immense, but the mental exhaustion that had consumed her for so long began to give way to a sense of purpose, however fragile. She sat down again at the clean table and this time picked up the stale bread. She did not eat it with despair, but with a silent gratitude, chewing each piece slowly. It was the first food she had truly tasted in months, a sign that life, slowly, was beginning to return. Far from there, in the clearing bathed in morning light, the little son awoke to the bird's song. He stretched against the bear's warm flank, who was already awake, watching the sunrise with his usual serenity. The boy got up, his blue eyes shining with the promise of a new day. He ran to the stream, where the bear was already waiting for him for the morning ritual of drinking fresh water. The little son laughed as the cold water touched his lips, and the bear grunted softly as if sharing his joy. That day the forest held a new adventure. The bear guided him to a denser part, where tall trees formed an almost impenetrable canopy. There, the boy discovered a bush laden with sweet red berries, which the bear taught him to pick carefully. His agile little fingers picked the small fruits, and he brought them to his mouth with innocent pleasure, offering some to the bear, who accepted them with a gentle snout. Each day the forest revealed more of its secrets, and the little son absorbed everything with an insatiable curiosity. He was not just a survivor, he was a child of nature, loved and nurtured by it. Maria, after a brief rest, felt the need to return to the edge of the forest, not to approach, but to feel her son's presence, to remember the miracle that propelled her. She hid behind a sturdy oak, observing the clearing from a distance. She saw the little son, and the bear sharing the fruits, a scene of pure harmony that tugged at her heart. There was no envy, only a deep admiration and a regret that still gnawed at her, but which now came with a glimmer of hope. She realized that redemption would not be a single event, but a continuous process, a daily work of rebuilding. She needed to learn to love again, to forgive herself, to find her own place in a world she had rejected. The forest, once a place of terror, was now a mirror, showing her the beauty of life and the depth of her own failure. Maria promised herself that she would no longer flee. She would face each day, each painful memory, each uncertain step, with the image of her happy son as her guide. The path would be long, but she was determined to walk it, to prove that even amidst the darkness, the light of overcoming could shine. She turned not to flee, but to return to the cabin and continue her work, her new purpose. Maria returned to the cabin, her body tired, but her soul in a state of wakefulness she hadn't felt in years. The days that followed were a tapestry of hard work and deep reflection. She cleaned every corner of her small dwelling, sweeping away not only the dust, but also the cobwebs of her past, the bitter memories that had nestled in her heart. The cabin, once a refuge from her misery, was slowly transforming into a space of renewal. She cooked simple but nutritious meals, feeling the warmth of the food fill a void that once seemed insatiable. Every gesture was an act of self-care, a way to honor the life she had scorned in herself and in her son. Every morning, even before the sun rose, Maria walked to the edge of the forest. Hidden among the oaks and pines, she observed the little son and the bear. She saw the boy run freely, his laughter echoing through the clearing, a sound that once tore at her, but now calmed her. She watched the bear, majestic and gentle, teaching the boy the secrets of the forest, which berries were edible, how to find pure water, how to move in harmony with nature. Each day the connection between them deepened, and Maria felt a silent reverence for the kindness of that beast. Her eyes, once opaque with pain, now shone with admiration and a persistent sadness, but with a new glimmer of hope. However, mere observation was not enough to appease the storm in her chest. The redemption she sought required more than cleaning her house or contemplating from a distance. One night, as the wind howled outside and the lamp flickered, Maria felt an urgency grow within her. She couldn't simply wait for time to heal her wounds. She needed to act, to do something tangible, a gesture that could express the depth of her regret and the sincerity of her change. How to approach without disturbing the peace her son had found. Her thoughts wandered to small gestures of affection. It was then that the idea came. An offering. Not to reclaim her son, for she knew she had no such right, but as a sign of respect, of gratitude to nature and the bear who had saved what she had abandoned. It would be a symbol of her own transformation, a fragile bridge cast over the abyss of her guilt. She decided she would make something with her own hands, something that represented the care and nourishment she had denied. In the following days, Maria dedicated herself to the task with renewed intensity. She gathered the sweetest and ripest berries, the same ones the bear taught her son to eat. With trembling yet steady hands, she kneaded the flour, mixing it with water and honey to make small, soft loaves baked in the clay oven. Each berry picked, each loaf kneaded, was an act of contrition, a silent prayer. She wove a small basket with flexible wicker, adorning it with oak leaves and small wildflowers, a delicate work that required patience and a focus she had lost. Her fingers, once hard and calloused, now moved with an almost forgotten tenderness, reflecting the softness that was reborn in her heart. When the basket was ready, filled with loaves and berries, Maria felt a lump in her throat. It was a simple gift, but laden with the full weight of her soul. The sun began to lean towards the west. It was time. With her heart pounding erratically, She picked up the basket and walked again to the edge of the forest. Her steps were slow, each one a decision, a renunciation of her past cruelty. As she approached the clearing, she saw the little son and the bear playing near the stream, oblivious to her presence. The boy laughed, and the bear watched him with a love that Maria now fully recognized. With a trembling sigh, Maria moved a little closer, to a point where the basket would be visible, but she would remain hidden. She carefully placed the basket on the ground, between the roots of a large oak, a place where it would be easily found. Her tear-filled eyes fixed on the basket, then on her son, then on the bear. A solitary tear rolled down her face, not of sadness, but of an overwhelming mix of hope and humility. She expected no forgiveness, no recognition. She just wanted to offer a sign, a beginning. She turned, her chest tight, and retreated to the safety of the trees, leaving the offering as a silent link between her dark past and the fragile promise of a different future. The climax was not a confrontation, but an act of surrender, a first step on a path of redemption that she knew would be long and uncertain, but now undeniably hers. Maria retreated into the darkness of the trees, her heart still pounding like an erratic drum. From her hiding place, she watched the basket, a splash of color amidst the green and brown of the forest. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity of expectation. The little son and the bear continued their play, oblivious to the offering. Maria felt a pang of discouragement, but soon replaced it with an understanding. Nature had its own rhythm, and patience was a virtue she was learning to cultivate. It was the bear who first noticed the strange presence. His snout lifted, sniffing the air, and his piercing eyes scanned the forest's edge. Maria held her breath, fearing discovery, but the bear's gaze stopped at the basket. With a soft grunt he approached, his curiosity overcoming caution. The little son, noticing the change in his guardian's behavior, followed him, his agile little steps. The boy saw the basket first. His blue eyes widened in surprise, and with a cry of joy, he ran to it. The bear watched him, attentive, but without stopping him. The little son picked up one of the soft loaves, smelled it, and with a radiant smile, offered it to the bear. The beast, with surprising delicacy, took the bread with his lips, chewing it slowly, as if savoring not just the food, but the gesture of affection. Then the boy picked up the berries, putting some in his mouth and offering the rest to the bear, who accepted them with a purr of satisfaction. Maria, hidden, felt the tears roll silently down her face. They were not tears of pain or guilt, but of a deep and overwhelming gratitude. The offering had been accepted. There was no anger, no rejection, only a pure and simple acceptance. The scene before her was the resolution her heart so yearned for. Her son was happy, safe, loved, and her attempt at redemption had been in some way welcomed. The bear, the beast she feared, had become the link to her healing. At that instant, Maria understood that her path was not to reclaim her son, but to accept the beauty of that miracle and to rebuild herself. She no longer needed to live in the shadow of her cruel past. The forest had shown her unconditional love, the resilience of life, and the possibility of forgiveness, not from her son, but from herself. The pain of separation would still exist, but now it came with a peace she never imagined possible. With a lighter heart, Maria turned, not to flee, but to embrace her own future. She knew that her cabin, once a refuge of bitterness, would now be a home of purpose. She would dedicate her days to small acts of kindness, to helping those in need, to cultivating the land with care, to living with the humility that nature had taught her. With each sunrise, she would remember the little sun in the clearing, a living reminder that love and hope could blossom in the most inhospitable places. Far from there, the little sun continued to play. The empty basket beside him, a new treasure in his memory. The bear, satisfied, lay down, watching the boy with his gentle eyes. The forest, in its ancestral wisdom, had stitched a new destiny for both, a destiny where innocence and protection walked hand in hand. Maria walked back, her steps firm and decided. The darkness of the forest no longer frightened her. It was a protective cloak, a silent testament to her transformation. She had found her redemption not in her son's forgiveness, but in the acceptance of her own failure and in the dedication to a life of compassion. The hardened-hearted widow had died, and in her place a woman was reborn, her soul marked by gratitude and the hope of a new beginning. The main conflict, the torment of her guilt, had been resolved. She was free to live. Maria was free to live, and that freedom manifested in every new dawn she greeted with a transformed heart. The cabin, once a reflection of her crumbling soul, blossomed under her care. The walls, formerly dusty, were cleaned with diligence. The windows now allowed sunlight to flood the interior, and a small garden of medicinal herbs and wildflowers began to sprout outside, a silent testament to her renewed hope. She no longer isolated herself. Over time, Maria began to reach out to the few neighbors who lived nearby, people she had once ignored with icy indifference. She offered help with the harvest, shared her healing herbs, and little by little her hands, once calloused by bitterness, now became a symbol of kindness. Her words, once scarce and sharp, gave way to soft conversations, to shy smiles that over time became more frequent and genuine. Every morning, even before the dew dried on the leaves, Maria still walked to the edge of the forest, no longer with the weight of guilt, but with a silent reverence. From her hiding place among the oaks, she observed the little son and the bear. He grew strong and agile, a true child of nature. His laughter echoed through the clearing, and Maria felt a pang of sweetness in her chest as she watched him explore, learn, and love the world around him, guided by the bear's patience and affection. The image of that happy boy, free from any trace of the pain she had caused him, was her greatest comfort and her greatest inspiration. She understood that love was not manifested solely in possession, but in the ability to wish for the well-being of another, even from a distance. The forest, which had once been the scene of her greatest mistake, became her sanctuary, a place of continuous learning and deep connection. Maria began to understand the cycles of life, the resilience of plants, the wisdom of animals. She felt part of something larger, a link in the intricate web of existence. Her life, once empty and without purpose, was now filled with meaning, with small acts of kindness that accumulated, weaving a new identity. The little son, oblivious to the past, continued his journey in the forest, a living reminder that life always finds a way, even after the deepest adversities. The bear, his faithful guardian, was the image of unconditional protection, a beacon of love amidst the wild vastness. The bond between them was a miracle, a testament that kindness resides in the most unexpected hearts. Maria never tried to approach again. She knew that her role was not to interfere with the life her son had built, but to honor it, living her own redemption with humility and gratitude. The pain of separation never completely disappeared, but transformed into a tender longing, mixed with the joy of knowing he was well. Her guilt had dissolved, giving way to a deep peace, the certainty that she had found her place in the world, a place where she could make a difference, one day at a time. The story of Maria and the little son became a whisper among the trees, a legend about forgiveness, overcoming, and the unwavering love of nature. Maria, the hardened-hearted widow, had been reborn. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the woman she became, a gentle soul, a guardian of life, an example that, even in the deepest shadows, the light of hope and compassion can always shine, illuminating the path to a new beginning. She was, finally, at peace. She was, finally, at peace. This peace was not the absence of painful memories, but the ability to coexist with them, transforming guilt into an engine for kindness. The years that followed were woven with the threads of humility and dedication. Maria, the once hardened widow, became a respected figure in the small rural community, not for wealth or power, but for the kindness of her hands and the wisdom that her now serene eyes conveyed. Her cabin, once a refuge of bitterness, radiated a welcoming warmth. The garden of medicinal herbs and wildflowers flourished exuberantly, its vibrant colors and sweet aromas a reflection of Maria's soul. She spent hours there, caring for each plant with an affection that extended to everything and everyone. Her neighbors, who once avoided her, now sought her company, whether for an herbal tea, advice on the harvest, or simply for a quiet conversation. Maria listened attentively. Her words were few, but laden with empathy and a deep understanding of human pain. She helped the sick, the elderly, the lonely, expecting nothing in return, only the silent satisfaction of sowing kindness. Every morning, even before the sun kissed the mountains, Maria walked to the edge of the forest. It was no longer a ritual of guilt, but of gratitude and admiration. Hidden among the ancient oaks, she watched the little son grow. He was no longer a small boy, but an agile young man, his blue eyes shining with the intelligence and freedom that only nature can bestow. His movements were fluid like those of a wild animal, his steps light, his ears attentive to the whispers of the wind and the song of the birds. The bear, his faithful guardian, aged gracefully. The silver hairs around his snout were the marks of a long and dedicated life. The connection between them was a spectacle of unconditional love. Maria saw the young man and the beast hunting together, sharing fruits and honey and communicating through an understanding that transcended words. The little son was a child of the forest, a human being who had learned to live in perfect harmony with the natural world, a living testament to the resilience of life and the capacity for love that resides in the most unexpected creatures. Maria felt a pang of longing, yes, but it was a tender longing, mixed with immense joy. She had lost a son to nature, but nature had transformed him into something extraordinary. She understood that her true love was not about possession, but about wishing for the happiness and well-being of another, even from a distance. The pain of separation had metamorphosed into a serene acceptance, a peace that filled her completely. The forest, which had once been the scene of her greatest mistake, became her sanctuary, a place of continuous learning. She felt part of something larger, a link in the intricate web of existence, and this connection nourished her. Her life, once empty and without purpose, was now filled with meaning, with small acts of kindness that accumulated, weaving a new identity. The little son, oblivious to the past, continued his journey in the forest, a living reminder that life always finds a way, even after the deepest adversities. Maria never tried to approach again, for she knew that her role was not to interfere, but to honor the life her son had built. The hardened-hearted widow had died, and in her place a woman was reborn each day, her soul marked by gratitude and the hope of a new beginning. She had found her true redemption, not in her son's forgiveness, but in the acceptance of her own failure and in the dedication to a life of compassion and love. She was, truly, at peace.